Well, thank you and good morning. I'd like to thank all of the members and friends of Karma Tiksum Choling for coming to be here with us on the holiday. Having a center like this is incredibly important for the study and the practice of the Dharma. Places like this are like a container in which the Dharma can be held. We create this container with our pure intention, and we maintain it through our good care for ourselves and our good care for each other. You're very fortunate to have Lama Tarchen here. He's had a very, very good training and has a very pure heart and an intelligent mind. In order to keep this container pure, it's good to have both the teacher and the student. The teacher helps us to understand the meaning of the Dharma. But the student also has a very important role. One of the Rinpoches from Tibet once told me that the student is almost more important than the teacher. This is because the key to the purity of Dharma is the lineage. The Buddha gave the teachings to his disciples and then they to their disciples. Nothing was added or subtracted. So for 2,600 years, this tradition has passed from one generation to the next through the vehicle of lineage. If the teacher holds a pure lineage and transmits it with purity, the student then receives it with purity. But the reason the Rinpoche said that the student is almost more important is because the student then has to hold this teaching and hold it well. Holding it doesn't mean just listening to it. It means practicing the three disciplines of hearing, contemplating, and meditating. So the student almost has the harder job. They have to listen to the teachings without defects. You know the kind of defects I'm talking about, the defects of not paying attention, the defects of thinking, well, that teacher's not very smart, or the defects of thinking, oh, I know all this already. But when we don't have these defects, then the Dharma really comes through to us. In fact, the very best thing to do when you come to a Dharma teaching is say, I am going to receive this teaching for the benefit of suffering beings. I'm not going to come to the teaching to see what everybody's wearing. I'm not going to come to the teaching to see my friends. Or I'm not going to come to the teachings because I think the teacher is good looking. The reason I'm coming to the teaching is because I understand my own suffering and I want to resolve the suffering of others. So if we keep this in mind as our main motivation, the teaching will go very well. That's because sometimes there can be obstacles in a teaching. The teacher could be very boring. We might feel sleepy or be wishing that we were on the beach. But if we have the wish to benefit beings very strongly in our mind, all of these obstacles will not be harmful to us. If we're doing something only for ourselves, it's easy to give up. But if we're doing it for the benefit of others, then they're relying on us. Really, we do understand suffering. It's the first of the Noble Truths. We have experienced suffering in our life. And so we know that we wish not to suffer. Just as we don't wish to suffer, no one wishes to suffer. And yet, because of confusion, that seems that we fall into it again and again. The Dharma is about eliminating the darkness of confusion. It's about showing us the nature of our mind as being awakened. The nature, not the content. Because sometimes the content is a little confusing. We think about this, we think about that. We worry, we have fears and anxieties. But the Buddha says that the basic nature of our mind is limitless and clear. Some people like to use the word emptiness, but I don't like that so much. Many people, when they think of emptiness, they think of the number 0, that it's a big nothing. But it's not like that. His Eminence Taisita Rinpoche prefers to use the word limitless. Without limits means that our mind has no solidity, no color, no shape, no location, no beginning, no end. Therefore, it's empty of limitation. But it's not nothing. It's, I don't know if this will translate well, but it's no thing, but it's not nothing. It sounds good. It sounds good in English, but I don't know that it translates. It's not a thing. It's not a thing, but it's also not nothing. Okay, yeah. That's one of those things that sounds good in English but doesn't translate very well. So it's limitless, which means, but it's not nothing. There's something there. There's a knowing.
Unknowing and desconhecido. Unknowing.
A knowing. It knows. It knows. The mind knows. The mind experiences things. The body conveys information, but it's the mind that experiences. For example, this room, we have an experience of this room. However, the true experience of it is only in our mind. When we fall asleep and dream tonight, we may dream of a room just like this. And our experience will seem very much the same. Yeah, it's in our experience is internal. And so this is why in the Dharma we work with the mind. Okay, I got off my subject. I was talking about the 3 trainings. I wandered into the second training, which is to contemplate. Because just hearing the Dharma is not enough. We have to contemplate it. Contemplation and meditation are 2 different things. Meditation, we're allowing our mind to come to rest. We let go of thoughts. However, in contemplation, we use thought. We review a subject intellectually, and we review it until we have an understanding. And then from that understanding, we make a resolution to do something about what we have understood. So, for example, if we contemplate impermanence, our first step will be to think about the impermanence of life. We might think about the seasons, and daytime and nighttime is changing always. And then we might move internally and think about our own life, that it has a beginning and an end. And thinking about this, we might be moved in the core of our being. We might think, oh, my life is going to end someday, I will die someday. And we will have deeply understood what we have intellectually reviewed. But contemplation doesn't stop there, because if we stop there, we might just become depressed. So instead, once we have understood, we move to the 3rd stage of contemplation. And that 3rd stage of contemplation is resolution, or making a resolution. And the resolution is very easy to remember. I must practice the Dharma. Because practicing the Dharma is the only thing that makes sense in the face of impermanence. You could write this resolution on your hand and use it as a cheat sheet, because it's really the resolution from most all contemplations, such as the 4 contemplations of the precious human birth and impermanence, karma, and defects of samsara. Yeah, each of these contemplations has that resolution. Because we have a precious human birth, and if we understand that to our core, then we must practice the Dharma. And if we understand impermanence and are touched to our core about impermanence, then we must practice the Dharma. If we understand karma and know that every thought, word, and action affect our life, we know that practicing the Dharma is the only thing that makes sense in understanding karma deeply. And finally, samsara, as we know, has many defects. Sometimes we don't understand that. We think, well, life's not so bad. Well, the weather's good today. I have a roof over my head and I have enough to eat. So what's wrong with that? But the problem is we have always expectation for more. The human mind is limitless, therefore our wanting is limitless. Do you like movies? If you like movies, then you will remember the opening sequence to the movie Over the Hedge, about the cartoon about animals. You may have not seen it. I'll explain. Someone has put money in a vending machine, but the candy won't come out. They hit the machine. They shake the machine, and the candy won't come out. Then finally they get down on their knees and put their hand into the chute, up into the machine. They look ridiculous. This is us. We have put our investment into samsara, but we haven't got the candy bar yet. So until we get the candy bar, we're going to beat on the machine. We're going to get on our knees and put our hands into the machine, thinking, I put my money in, I deserve my candy. This is the wanting of samsara. This is why it's almost, you could almost say it's impossible to get out of samsara. Part of us knows that that candy bar is not what we really want. But we can't help but saying, we paid for it, we need to get it. So we always are thinking samsara will pay off someday down the line. If we just stay in samsara long enough, we'll get a big prize. But the effort is ridiculous, really. It causes a lot of pain and suffering. So if we can understand the defects of samsara, then we will want to practice the Dharma. I'm a movie freak. It's difficult to leave samsara when you want to see what's coming out, the movies that are coming out. But the point of contemplation then is to, review the meaning, recognize the meaning, and then make a resolution. These three points were taught by His Eminence Sete Rinpoche as a way of practicing contemplation. But contemplation also consists of asking questions and getting doubts clarified. And that is why it's important to ask questions when you have curiosities or doubts. Then after one hears the Dharma, contemplates, then one must practice. And so it is that when we learn about the Dharma, we begin to have some understanding, faith, and then we meditate and we attain what is called certainty. So practicing really is the important element here. You could hear but not contemplate. You might learn a lot, but where do you go with it? Then when you contemplate, you apply it to your own experience, and then you gain an understanding. But if you only go that far and say, oh, that was nice, there's never really a change in your mind. And for that, you have to practice the meditation. So I wanted to at least say these things about the three disciplines to begin. We'll take a break maybe in about 15 minutes, but I want to give you some history about this practice. I was asked to teach about the 7-point mind training. I'm very excited to share this with you because literally this teaching changed my life. I'm not joking about this. Before I received this teaching, I did not understand the nature of my experience. I was shaking the candy machine, and I was very disappointed that samsara was not giving me a candy bar. I was very anxious and very depressed. I didn't know how to deal with how I was feeling. Sometimes my emotions would hit me like a wave of the ocean and knock me down. But when I learned this teaching, I understood what emotions are. And I learned how to work with them, how to make the mind workable. Because it's very easy to become the victim of your own emotion, and to become the victim of your own belief about the world. It's very easy to not think well of yourself. And not thinking well of yourself, you distrust others. But the purpose of this teaching is to understand emotion and work with it. I like to tell the story of my teacher, Khenpo Kartha Rinpoche, and how one day I carried my very beat-up copy of the 7-point mind training into his interview room. This is probably my first copy of this book. The covers were falling off, so I put binding in it. My Dharma friends put lamination on the pages. I took the book into Khenpo Rinpoche's interview room one day. It was just a quick interview. I didn't know I'd have to have the book with me. I said, I'm so ashamed of the bad condition of this book. And through his translator, his nephew, Lama Karma, he asked me, he said, what book is this? I said, it's the mind training, or Lodjong teaching. Lo means mind, and Jong means training. So Lodjong, so it says Lodjong training book. And he said, let me see it. He doesn't read English, but I handed him the book. He looked through it like he was reading it. He probably saw all the scratch marks I made in the book with my pencil. He probably saw the pages which are no longer, they're round on the edges instead of pointed. And then he handed the book back to Lama Karma. Lama Karma touched it to his head as though to give himself a blessing and handed it back to me. And Khenpo Rinpoche said, there is nothing better than this. He said, you might look around thinking, surely I will find a better teaching elsewhere. He says, but you don't need to look around. Everything is here. It's a complete path and a complete teaching in itself. This reminds me of something that Khenpo Rinpoche said to me earlier. When I first got out of retreat and he requested that I travel and teach, he gave me a list of things to teach. This book was not on the list. So I said, please may I teach this book? And he said, yes, yes, of course. And he said, and tell all of your Dharma friends this. Tell them that they can attain absolute and complete Buddhahood simply through practicing love and compassion. I felt like he had given me one of those riddles the Zen masters talk about. You know those riddles like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? You know, and I said, you can attain Buddhahood only through love and compassion? And I thought about it again and again. And really, it's true. Because as you know, I left behind one other subject, and that was the Four Noble Truths. Remember I said we all understand suffering. We also have to understand the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. And then once we understand the cause of suffering, and then the third noble truth, the cessation or the end of suffering, makes perfect sense. So as you all know, the cause of suffering in the teachings of the Buddha is clinging. Some people like to use, in English, they like to use the word desire. I sort of prefer the word clinging, because it makes me think of plastic wrap in the kitchen. I mean, after all, you can desire enlightenment, right? But clinging is like willful. Like one is attempting to conquer something. I mean, that's really what we cling to the most, isn't it? Our concept of self. We have this concept, I exist. And then, of course, the minute we say I exist, then others exist. Once there is the concept of self, there is the concept of other. And then self is very busy trying to conquer the other. We try to influence others. We try to get them to do what we want. And it's almost like we're the kings and queens of little kingdoms. And if our friends are good to us, we're nice to them. And if they're not nice to us, then like the monarch, we can start execution. And all of this comes from clinging to the self. Seriously, this is the root of all of our suffering. One quick story about a woman who I met in prison. I wasn't in the prison, I was visiting her. She said, I am in prison because I am a drug addict. I couldn't stop my desire for drugs. But she said, now I see what my real problem is. I have always held a secret inner idea, and that is that I feel that I am better than others. Secretly, I feel I am better than others. And since I am better than others, I can do what I want. I said, well, your desire is maybe secret, but it's not just yours. I think we are all a little like that. We all have some secret feelings that we are somehow different from others. Maybe we think we are better, or maybe we think we are better at being the worst. Like, I am the worst. I am the worst of the worst. But really, that's just another way of saying I'm best at being worst. This is the confusion of samsara. So it all comes back to clinging to self. How do we stop clinging to self? This is the key to leaving samsara. First of all, we find out what the self is. In the Hinayana, we talk about the 5 constituents of self. We find out that self is not unitary, but made of 5 parts. Form, feeling, and so forth. Mental formation, consciousness, and perception. Sorry, my order was wrong. But those 5. So that tells the intellect that self is not a unitary, solid thing. And we start to undercut this notion of self. We undercut this through the practice of sitting meditation. When we sit and meditate, we let go of every thought. We don't say, I'm going to keep the good ones and get rid of the bad ones. We sit and let go of every thought. And in cutting these thoughts, we cut our tendency to cling. And in cutting clinging, self-clinging slowly begins to weaken. We begin to wear self-clinging down. And the muscles of mindfulness get stronger. Mindfulness becomes stronger than clinging. And this is the first way we begin to undercut the self-clinging. But even quiet sitting is only pacification. The seeds of self-clinging are still there. And with the right conditions, they'll sprout again. That's why quiet sitting meditation is sometimes called pacification or tranquility. It's like cutting off a weed at the ground. The root is still in. So with the next rain, you get a new weed. So in quiet sitting meditation, we cut the thoughts. But the root of self-clinging is still in the ground. So we need some practice in order to pull the root out. And that is why in the Mahayana we practice love and compassion. Because in love and compassion, we don't just pacify self-clinging. We dissolve the root of self-clinging. When we practice love for another person, we begin to lose our boundary of self. Love brings us out of ourselves. Compassion does the same. The Buddhist definition of love is wishing for others to be happy. And the definition of compassion is wishing for people to be free of suffering, beings to be free of suffering. So in order to dissolve this root of self-clinging, we have to strengthen love and strengthen compassion. Right now we have natural love for those we are close to. There's still a little attachment mixed in though. My family, my friends. So that's why they call this mind training. Through practicing mind training, we can expand the group of those for whom we feel love and compassion. And in so doing, we can slowly dissolve self-clinging and thus attain Buddhahood. And it can be an easy path, not a lot of hardship, because the method is love and compassion. This reminds me of something that St. Catherine of Siena said. Yes, I am a Catholic schoolgirl. She was my patron saint. She said, all the way to heaven is heaven. All the way to heaven is heaven because Jesus said, I am the way. So for us in the Dharma, the way is love and compassion. And if we practice this love and compassion, not only will we be happy, we will be loved by everyone. Because everyone loves someone who is loving. So that is what this training is about. How to love both oneself and others. And then gradually expand that to include all beings. So now I'd like to give you a short break so that you can stretch.